Murderous masterminds. Brilliant, wicked, conniving.
It wasn't just a happenstance, haphazard murder spree of a year. It was 50 weeks of planned killing.
They are driven by revenge, dogma, and ego.
My name is Ted Bundy, and I'm the defendant in the case, and I'm just here to introduce myself.
Their common trait, high intelligence. What transformed these gifted minds to become some of the most grisly killers? And who is most evil? A scale exists to measure the darkest corners of human behavior. From impulse killings to madness-fueled violence. Calculated acts of cruelty, torture, and brutality. Forensics now reveals those among us who are most evil. Malicious masterminds. They are among the most devious and twisted killers. Their intelligence is their greatest weapon. It enables them to plot elaborate crimes and elude capture. In California, Edmund Kemper is locked up for killing his grandparents. He tricks the system to release him early and then launches into a year-long killing spree. Chicago, 19th century doctor H.H. Holmes slaughters victims in his hotel and then sells their body parts. To him, murder is thrilling and profitable. 1977, Ted Kaczynski disappears into the woods to plan a drawn-out, deadly attack. He would terrorize the U.S. for nearly 20 years. In each case, the murders are gruesome, vicious, evil. But no two evil acts are the same. Now there is a scale with 22 levels. It decodes a killer's motive, method, and mind. The more heinous the crime, and the more rational the perpetrator, the higher the criminal is placed on the scale. Creator of the scale, renowned forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Stone. Dr. Stone explores these killers' pasts and crimes to understand what motivates them to kill, and uses his scale to navigate the minds of the most heinous killers.
Serial killers in general are cunning. They must strategize, plot, and scheme to execute their plans. But those who most successfully carry out their murders are exceptionally clever and smart. These killers usually occupy the higher levels on the scale of evil.
Among these mastermind killers is Edmund Kemper.
We're talking about a cold, hard murder, you know, and mayhem and assault and robbery and rape.
Northern California, 1972. The morning before Easter Sunday, Edmund Kemper makes the bed, calmly washes up, and leaves the house. The home is tidy. Still, it seems like an unremarkable day. But for Kemper, it is a momentous day. He just actualized a childhood dream: to kill his mother. After she draws her last breath, he whispers to himself, "Poetic justice." She is one of Kemper's 10 victims.
Kemper is among the most gruesome serial killers. This towering 6'9" man slaughtered, butchered, even devoured his victims. He delighted in killing, and due to his intelligence, his crimes went long unnoticed.
What compelled him to kill his own mother? And how did his intelligence and skillful deceit fuel his killing rampage? To understand the roots of such sadistic violence, Dr. Stone delves into Kemper's past. he uncovers nightmarish details. Kemper is raised in a tumultuous household. His parents separate when he is 4. He and his 2 sisters stay with their mother, who is embittered by the split. She berates young Kemper, locks him in the basement for months at a time to punish him. While in seclusion, Kemper creates fantasies. He imagines killing his mother, her friends, his teacher. The isolation gets to him, stirs hate within him. He takes out his aggressions on his sister's toys, cuts off their heads and limbs. This secret habit foreshadows his future crimes.
His mother is the defining figure in Kemper's childhood. The rage that she feels for her husband is directed onto her son. The oppression Kemper experiences slowly builds to anger within him.
As a teenager, Kemper lives between his mother's and his grandparents' homes. His grandparents make him feel like a burden, unwanted. In a fit of rage, he shoots both grandparents dead. And he is sent to a mental institution for adult prisoners. While there, he masters skills in deception. 1964, prison experts evaluate Kemper. He scores 136 on IQ tests. Of superior intelligence, one doctor notes. Surrounded by psychopaths, he spends his days learning about their crimes. He also befriends the very psychologists treating him, earning him a job as a research aide, administering psychological tests to other inmates. Kemper memorizes these 22 psychology tests, learns how to manipulate and eventually outsmart the system. Having mastered the psychology exams, he earns high marks when tested and wins praise from psychologists. 5 years later, he is released early.
Kemper uses his intelligence to trick the authorities. This makes brilliant killers among the most dangerous criminals. They have foresight and the capacity to outsmart not only their victims, but also their captors. To do so, they are extremely calculating and scheming. They carry out their crimes with absolute precision. And when put in an environment that triggers their rage, they are merciless.
When released, Kemper is sent back to his mother.
But I was put right back in the pressure cooker that I was hatched out of. It was a very sick and very depressive and very unhealthy relationship.
His mother continues to taunt Kemper, telling him he's a failure, just like his father. Drives aimlessly, passing young female hitchhikers. He begins to pick them up, enjoys their company and their vulnerability. These encounters reignite his urge to kill. Edmund Kemper. His brilliance impresses doctors, and his superior intelligence helps him to launch a killing spree, including his own flesh and blood. At age 15, he murders his grandparents. After serving 5 years, he is released and goes on a murderous rampage. Santa Cruz, 1972. Kemper drives aimlessly, passing young female hitchhikers. His first victims are 2 female college students. He picks them up and shoots them dead in his car. Kemper takes the bodies home, dismembers their limbs and heads. just as he had done to his sister's dolls. He saves some of the body parts in the refrigerator as trophies, even cannibalizes pieces of them, and discards the rest along the California coast. He eventually slaughters and mutilates a total of 6 young women. Each murder, he later describes, is a fantasy coming to life. Police have no idea who this killer is. To them, Kemper doesn't exist. He is relentless.
It wasn't just a happenstance, haphazard murder spree of a year. It was 50 weeks of planned killing.
With each murder, he became more excited, more empowered, and more charged to kill again, and more savagely each time.
Kemper's rage drives him to kill college girls. But he finally directs his anger towards the source of his rage: his mother. On the day before Easter, he bludgeons and decapitates her in her bedroom. Hours later, he turns himself in to police.
During Kemper's childhood, his mother was an abusive presence. As he got older, he channeled his aggression into murder. Targeting female hitchhikers, in a sense, was like killing his mother over and over again. Ultimately, killing his mother was his form of retribution, closure.
Edmund Kemper is given 7 consecutive life sentences. Considering his crimes, Dr. Stone places him on the scale.
Because of the serial nature of his crimes and the sadistic pleasure Edmund Kemper experienced, I would place him on level 22 of my scale. This is the highest category, a place for torture murderers whose crimes involve butchery and sexual assault. He is undeniably one of the most evil killers still alive.
How could Kemper kill with his bare hands? Is there something fundamentally different about him that makes him a cold-blooded killer? Science is trying to answer that question. And some clues lie in the biology of human empathy. It starts with mirror neurons, brain cells necessary to recognizing and acknowledging human emotions.
What mirror neurons do is to really be the building block of social behavior in our brain.
Marco Iacoboni, a neuroscientist at UCLA, is studying how mirror neurons play a role in learning empathy and understanding violence. His theory? Mirror neurons tell the brain how to read and feel emotions. People without these mirror cells cannot feel empathy. They cannot see pain being felt by another person. To test this hypothesis, he conducts functional MRI scans on subjects as they observe and respond to emotional cues. While in the MRI, the subjects see pictures of facial expressions showing happiness or anger in a pair of goggles. They first are told to merely observe the images. Then they are asked to mimic the emotions. The results are intriguing. The brain scans show that mirror cells travel to 2 parts of the brain to connect an action to a feeling. Brain activity starts in the region responsible for muscle movement. The mirror cells instruct the brain to literally mirror the observed action. The cells then travel to the brain's emotional centers and assign an emotion to that action. This is why, when normal people see a smile, they have an emotional understanding of happiness. And these are the building blocks of empathy.
When I feel certain emotions, I express those emotions with my own body, with my own face.
Iacoboni was able to validate this theory by testing unlikely subjects, autistic patients, who generally lack empathy.
And I want you to point to the face that shows how she's feeling in the picture. Show me angry.
Autistics know how to describe emotions,
embarrassed.
but many have difficulty feeling or expressing them.
Show me joy.
Functional MRI scans of the autistic subjects show very little activation of mirror neurons, and the more severe the autism, the less activity in the mirror neuron system. There's no correlation between autism and violence. But Iacoboni believes that a detachment between mirror neurons and the emotional centers of the brain may block feelings of empathy and is a key to explaining violence. He plans to expand his research to studying sociopaths and look for further correlations.
We believe that violent behavior could be triggered by some form of disconnect between mirror neurons and emotional brain centers.
Lack of empathy is a starting point to understanding mastermind killers like Edmund Kemper. Murderers who, despite being intelligent and accomplished, show no regard for their victims. When we continue, Dr. Stone examines other masterminds whose intelligence helps them to commit unspeakable crimes. Wicked masterminds. They are shrewd, clever, and among the most evil serial killers. Their extreme intelligence allows them to outsmart their victims and evade authorities. Like Ted Bundy, one of the most lethal killers in recent history.
My name is Ted Bundy, and I'm the defendant in the case, and I'm just here to introduce myself.
Bundy brutally murders scores of young women across the U.S. in the 1970s. His violent streak begins while he's an honor student at the University of Washington. After a girlfriend dumps him, he seeks revenge on women. He lures them by posing as a police officer, fireman, or businessman. He then rapes, strangles, and finally drowns them. Over 4 years, he kills at least 35 women.
Ted Bundy was an expert imposter because he was extremely attractive and persuasive. He knew how to take advantage of his good looks and charm.
This is also evident during his trial. Bundy serves as his own counsel. He impresses the court, even the judge.
You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
He is ultimately sentenced to death. Some killers are so clever, so insidious, that they are never found. Like the notorious Zodiac killer. 1969, San Francisco. A city lives in fear of a murderer calling himself the Zodiac.
He's an absolutely ruthless, completely merciless killer.
He executes 5 people, approaching them in lovers' lanes, gunning them down, or stabbing them to death. He taunts and teases police, leaving clues in letters to the press. Each time, he threatens to strike again. Investigators are baffled, unable to crack a cryptogram that contains 360 symbols and allegedly the killer's identity. He ultimately claims 5 victims over 3 years and is never apprehended. His legacy lives on, and his identity remains unknown.
Though not identified definitively in his lifetime, Arthur Lee Allen, whose IQ was 136, was suspected of being San Francisco's Zodiac killer. From evidence gathered after his death, his guilt is now a near certainty. His ability to evade capture and kill ruthlessly places him among the most evil masterminds.
There are masterminds who thrive on the mental challenge of executing the perfect crime, like Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb, two wealthy college friends of genius intelligence. Chicago, 1924. Bored with their privileged lives, Leopold and Loeb hatch a plan to kidnap and kill an acquaintance for ransom. Money isn't their objective. Rather, their aim is to pull off an elaborate crime. They pick up a 14-year-old neighbor, bludgeon him to death, pour acid on his body to hide his identity, and burn his clothes. They then dump his body near railroad tracks and send a letter demanding $10,000 to the boy's parents. The culprits delight in reading about their crime. Virtually everything had been perfectly orchestrated, except for one mistake. Loeb's eyeglasses accidentally fell out of his pocket at the crime scene. Police later find the glasses near the dead body. It leads to the arrest of Leopold and Loeb. During the trial, a prosecutor described the crime as so meticulously carried out that there would have been no arrest, no hearing, had the glasses not fallen out. Both were found guilty and given life sentences. While they were intelligent assailants, they were novice killers, and not in the league of another Chicago killer who preceded them decades before. H. Holmes, a 19th century doctor who killed as many as 200 victims. To him, murder is not only a game, but also lucrative, making him one of the most cold-blooded masterminds of all time. 1893, Chicago. The World's Fair is in full swing. Visitors from around the country descend onto the Windy City. Many stay at Dr. Harry Howard Holmes's Grand Hotel. It is 3 stories high, stretches an entire block, and known as the Castle. But behind these walls are death traps. Most victims are women he rapes, tortures, and slaughters. What drives this successful doctor to such macabre acts? How does he use his brilliance to get away with crimes for 17 years? Coming up, Dr. Stone explores Holmes's life to answer these questions. H. Holmes, a 19th century doctor whose intelligence is his greatest weapon. What transformed this successful physician into one of the most carnal, vicious murderers in American history? His story begins with a troubled childhood. He is born in 1861 and grows up in isolation. Death fascinates him. He is raised by extremist parents. His mother is a zealous Methodist. She reads the Bible to him daily, instilling in him notions of good and evil. His father is an abusive alcoholic. The boy flees from him by immersing himself in his studies and collecting macabre souvenirs.
As a child, he was a loner. He finds refuge in his astounding intellect. He is an exceptional student, but somehow his mind gravitates toward all things grisly and morbid.
At age 16, Holmes graduates from high school. Soon after, he enters medical school. He shows extraordinary skill in dissection and plots to make money off of the cadavers. He insures fictitious people, puts himself as the beneficiary, and presents the cadavers as the deceased. Over the next 17 years, his crimes escalate to murder. 1893. Holmes is making a name for himself in the booming city of Chicago. He's a young doctor who owns a large building that houses a pharmacy, shops, and a 71-room hotel. Neighbors call him the land-rich physician. But some of the building's workers and hotel guests begin to disappear. As many as 50 travelers turn up missing after checking into his hotel. Holmes ensnares them by gassing them in their rooms. He then sends their bodies to the basement through a secret chute. In the pit of this house of horrors, Holmes performs repulsive acts. He beats and sexually assaults female victims. Then, applying his surgical skills, he slices up the bodies, stripping flesh from bones. He disposes of evidence in vats of acid. He then polishes and assembles the bones to make skeletal models, which he sells to medical schools.
Holmes possesses every trait of evil. He basked in dismembering, mutilating, and abusing his victims.
Fortune is Holmes's primary motive. He also profits from the dead bodies by collecting on fraudulent insurance policies connected to them. But as the World's Fair winds down, people become suspicious of the activity at his hotel. His creditors actively pursue him. Holmes sets the castle ablaze to evade creditors and destroy evidence. He then flees to Texas, where his crimes continue. Police catch him on a fraud case. Once they begin to question him, clues to his murderous crimes emerge. He eventually pleads guilty and confesses to more than 200 murders. The press dub him a human demon. In 1896, he is sentenced to death by hanging.
Holmes went to great lengths to kill. He constructed a monstrous house of death. He successfully pulled off his crimes by manipulating the public's trust and by drawing out the murderers. He was deceptive, depraved, indeed the consummate torture murderer. For these reasons, I put Holmes at number 22, the highest level of the scale, and where Edmund Kemper stands. Because Holmes killed more victims and tortured them more prolongedly, he even outdoes Kemper in depravity.
There is another mastermind whose genius intelligence terrorized the U.S. for nearly 2 decades. His infamy and viciousness place him among the most evil. They are captivating, educated, and unsuspectingly deadly. They are murderous masterminds who brutally hunt and prey on victims like any other serial killer. The key difference: their brilliance makes them harder to detect and capture. Like Ted Kaczynski, one of the most elusive killers of the 20th century. A child prodigy, Kaczynski uses his genius intelligence to terrorize the nation for nearly 2 decades. He is America's most wanted and feared killer. known simply as the Unabomber. Holed up in a 10-foot by 12-foot wood cabin, the Unabomber spends his waking hours consumed with a horrifying plot: to eliminate his enemies in order to remake the world. In 1978, he begins sending mail bombs to people whose beliefs he opposes. This intellectual terrorist ultimately claims 3 lives and maims 11. For 18 years, Kaczynski baffles officials. His crimes yield no evidence, no clues to his identity. The Unabomber goes undetected. What is Kaczynski's motive? And how does he elude capture for so long?
The Unabomber case was probably one of the longest and most terrifying mysteries in the U.S. How Ted Kaczynski got away with murder for nearly 2 decades points to an extraordinary mind.
To understand the roots of Kaczynski's violence, Dr. Stone looks into his childhood and uncovers disturbing details. Chicago, 1942. Ted Kaczynski is 9 months old. A severe skin rash sends him to the hospital. Doctors strap him to the bed to prevent him from touching the sores. For a month, the infant lies in isolation, barred from human contact. According to his mother, young Ted is never the same afterwards. He is shy, awkward, listless.
Socialization begins at birth through human contact. Isolation at such an early age can be emotionally destructive. Far more likely, however, is the fact of his having been born with genetic tendency to paranoid schizophrenia.
As he grows up, it's clear young Ted is of exceptional intelligence. At age 10, Kaczynski scores 170 on an IQ test. Genius level begins at 140. He skips 2 grades and immerses himself in his studies. But something is still amiss. Kaczynski is withdrawn. He spends time alone, shows aggression towards his peers. 1958, 16-year-old Kaczynski enrolls in Harvard. It is an intense era in academia. The sciences embark on controversial research that would be considered unethical today. Kaczynski volunteers to be a subject in a psychological experiment. Brilliant yet reclusive outcasts are recruited. Each subject is given a code name. Kaczynski is called Lawful. Participants are asked to write down their world philosophy, their personal manifesto. Their views are then openly challenged. The goal is to test their emotional strength. Heart and breathing rates are measured. Kaczynski responds wildly, brimming with fury. The study lasts for 3 years.
This continual tormenting at such an impressionable age could have affected Kaczynski, building long-term hostility that would find an outlet later in life. Perhaps these experiences and his genius mind put him on a path of evil.
Did these emotional incidents early in life contribute to Kaczynski's violence? And could his exceptional intelligence have played a part? Research is showing that high IQ brains grow differently from normal brains, and that negative events can have lasting effects.
We know that in some people who have a very high IQ, there's a cost associated with this high mental functioning.
Dr. Paul Thompson is a neurologist at the UCLA Neuroimaging Lab. He is mapping the basic biology of the growing brain and exploring how high intelligence may impact behavior. One study scanned the brains of high and average IQ subjects annually over several years.
So basically what we do is we take a snapshot of how the brain looks every year, and then we kind of compile these into a movie.
During the first 3 years of life, a normal brain is teeming with billions of brain cells, making 1 million new neural connections a day. Extremely intelligent brains have even more brain cells during this same period. Their brains are more active, working even harder to make more neural connections. The results over time show a remarkable pattern. High IQ brains take an average of 2 more years to make and organize neural connections and mature.
This is a really surprising finding. You might think that smart children, everything happens sooner. Their brain grows faster, grows earlier.
Does this difference in brain development affect behavior? Can traumatic events have a greater impact on high IQ brains that are still maturing? Perhaps in some cases.
There's some evidence that at the very high end of IQ, they may become socially withdrawn, they may not take the time to focus on other emotional areas of development, and we think that an extreme focus on intellectual pursuits might be detrimental.
It's not likely this different growth rate makes a brilliant mind more vulnerable to violence. But studies have shown that negative childhood experiences can literally destroy brain cells and impair emotional development. Thompson has proven this by tracking brain maturation of children through early adulthood. From that data, he discovers that from birth to 20, the developing brain is very impressionable.
So any experiences that you have during that time are critical for the future development of the brain in adulthood.
Could Kaczynski's childhood trauma have triggered his violent rage and launched him into a life of murder? The answer's up next. (1962). Ted Kaczynski graduates from Harvard. He has the potential to become an accomplished mathematician. Instead, his genius leads him to become America's most renowned terrorist, the Unabomber. After Harvard, Kaczynski earns a PhD and lands a tenured post at the University of California, Berkeley, teaching math. But a year later, he quits and retreats to a solitary life in the thick woods of Montana. There, he spends the next 18 years devising a violent plan to eradicate modern technology, which he believes is destroying humanity. 1978. He sends his first mail bomb to the science department at the University of Chicago. Over the next 5 years, bombs turn up at other universities and businesses. Dozens of victims are wounded and disfigured. Each time, the explosives are more powerful, deadlier, but without a trace of evidence. Kaczynski takes extreme precautions to cover his tracks. He lines his shoes with a smaller sole so that his footsteps could not be identified. The bombs are made of stolen or homemade materials, all untraceable. And he records every move in code to conceal his plans. Suddenly, after 12 mail bombs, there is silence. From 1987 to 1993, Kaczynski disappears to draft a personal manifesto for the world to see. It defines who he is. It's a 65-page revenge plan calling for the destruction of modern life. Its opening line, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. It calls for the overthrow of scientists, power mongers, those who fight passively. Dr. Stone finds connections between Kaczynski's rage and his self-image.
His manifesto, ironically, damns the very kind of people who he is. Kaczynski himself was a scientist, and he craved power. Ostracized all his life, he was angry with a world that didn't accept him. He clearly found power by being the Unabomber. By plotting mail bomb schemes, he kills from afar, passively, an approach he condemns in the manifesto.
1996. Detectives finally get their big break. A man comes forward, convinced that the Unabomber is his brother, Ted Kaczynski. A month-long stakeout in Montana ends with an arrest. Officials are shocked by the man they discover. He is gaunt, filthy, and wild-looking. But unlike his appearance, his cabin is pin-neat and jam-packed with books, bombing materials, and weapons. It would take the FBI 12 days to inventory the cabin's contents.
A search of his cabin uncovers a mad genius mind. Among serial killers, Ted Kaczynski is unique, killing not for sadistic pleasure, but for a philosophical cause. His manifesto shows a brilliant but pathological mind. To many, an evil genius.
Kaczynski is charged with killing 3 victims and disabling 11. He pleads guilty to all counts and is sentenced to life without parole in ADX Supermax in Colorado. Evaluating Kaczynski's case, Dr. Stone places him on the scale of evil.
Because of his systematic planning of brutal but detached murders, I would place him on level 16, a place reserved for psychopaths committing multiple vicious acts. But unlike Kemper and Holmes, he killed from afar. He never faced down his victims. Therefore, he lands lower on the scale of evil.
Malicious masterminds. They outmaneuver everyone. Most usually get away with numerous murders. Their killing sprees last for years. They are hard to identify, conceal their vile intentions, and strike when least expected. These traits make them perhaps the most dangerous type of killer. As Dr. Stone continues on his search for these ingenious killers, he helps us understand what makes them tick, what makes them most evil.